Hiya! Yes, I am indeed doing this Sherlock review from a closet, but it's the place that had the best lighting and sound for the day, so there you go. I am a few days behind in watching Hounds of the Baskervilles, but I have finally done so this is a review for that. Very different from the Arthur Conan Doyle story, that is absolutely for certain. It wasn't so different that you couldn't enjoy it, that's for sure. I mean, it took you on a surprising journey. I thought the idea of animal experimentation was a bit more disturbing, I suppose, in a way, than just having a feral dog with some phosphorus on his mouth. I was a bit annoyed, though, that it wasn't like the whole family curse legacy thing, but rather Secret Service, government stuff going on, which is good, but is, I don't know, not as I mean, it is kind of whodunit, but I know it's more complicated and more modern, and that's the whole point, but I just felt like it strayed a bit far from the path. I don't understand why Sherlock suddenly seems to be having difficulties not smoking, and there's a much higher concern for him doing drugs, whereas that actually wasn't happening originally. Before it was about him, you know, having the the only references of drugs were the 3-patch problem and I don't even smoke, which he said to Lestrade in A Study in Pink. And now he, you know, is begging John to give him some, and he's paid off all these people, and, you know, the cigarettes are hidden in his apartment. I'm assuming the factors that have led to this is the fact that Moriarty escaped and he's not heard from him. He's not had any cases in a while. And the whole Irene Adler escapade is like, it's wearing him down. But I do think it's very sudden and sort of a lax explanation. We went from this Sherlock for 3 whole episodes where, you know, there was hints that he used to do drugs, that was for sure, I mean, with Lestrade's drug bust, but he wasn't actually taking drugs or even smoking anymore. He just had nicotine patches, and now suddenly he's much more unstable. At least that's my feeling. So we went from a scandal in Belgravia where he seemed more compassionate and more balanced now that he had Mrs. Hudson and John, to showing you again that he still is quite not bipolar, I guess, but he goes through the manic stages and definitely is still eccentric and wired a different way to neurotypicals, I guess. And the reason I'm using the term neurotypicals is because they do mention in this episode that he has Asperger's. John says it passingly to Lestrade, which I thought was really interesting, the fact that they've decided to address the fact that it could be more than just him being eccentric. I mean, Arthur Conan Doyle definitely didn't have a term for it in those days, but it is on the Aspergian spectrum, how Sherlock fixates on certain topics and knows so much about them. And I think that's really good of the show to bring that into awareness, because it's always good to highlight things that people perhaps wouldn't have read about or gone in to investigate otherwise, and people might be watching the show and relating to some aspects of Sherlock's personality, and then they can get some closure on that, so that's good. A bit irrelevant though, I'm sorry for rambling about that. I thought that the filming was different for this episode. It seemed to lack its Sherlock unique seal. The transitions were all light driven by solar flares, and a lot of the scenes, particularly when John's trapped in the lab, reminded me a lot of the first season when they are doing the solar system fight with the golem. Am I got the wrong mythological creature there? I don't know, my apologies if I have. When John's attacking the man and there's all the lights everywhere, and yeah, that it seemed to throw back to that, which means it is somewhat still within the spectrum of the Sherlock filming that they've established so far, but it did just seem to go a bit different. The transitions, some of the compositions were really awkward, and I thought that kind of strange, since the first episode of Scandal in Belgravia had beautiful, flawless transitions between Sherlock standing up and going back down to the car, and this one had really awkward compositions, particularly when they're in the hotel or cottage inn at the moor, and John is sitting on the couch and Sherlock's having his anxiety attack, and they kept comping Sherlock's face in halfway, like there, and John was sitting back here, and it almost looked superimposed, like a green screen, and it really shouldn't have been that awkward, and it just seemed very unusual that a team that is very, very capable of absolutely stunning transitions kept going for these sort of fade-ins with really awkward I know Sherlock is the one who's feeling all those emotions right now, so he should definitely be in the foreground and in focus, but it just seems slightly off to me. It wasn't their usual crisp, clean cut transitions. But I was wondering if that was intentional, perhaps, to deal with the fact that it is a very anxiety and driven episode with lots of fear and uncertainty and distortion of sound and vision. And so if that's the case, then the filming technique worked very well. So I guess it depends on what the intention was or how you choose to interpret. If you interpret it that way, then it's not a problem at all. What else have I written? Yeah, we had Batlock appear again. For those who don't know what that means, is like when Sherlock's standing on the rocks and with his cape billowing like he's Batman on top of Gotham City, observing his town, which is fine, but it's a bit of a laugh, kind of a bit over the top, which is fine, I guess. I did find it weird that Sherlock went. I must admit that was my biggest beef with the difference between the original Arthur Conan Doyle series and the BBC series. Is although Sherlock does go in Hounds of the Baskervilles, he goes incognito and hides amongst the moor and lives in a cave with an escaped convict nearby, and John just sends letters. And I was kind of hoping for the whole John Watson on his own doing the "Dear Sherlock, here's information," just because it's interesting to have that dynamic where John is independent. I know that he did help a bit in the scandal of the Graveyard case and was sent on his own, so they sort of covered that there. But it's an entire case that John is sent to solve, and he deals with all the anxiety, and he deals with these deductions, and that sort of was lost. Instead, we had a Sherlock sort of domineering everything, but then we had John have to be his saviour in a way, because Sherlock had this moment of doubt and complete uncertainty, and that was really beautifully done. I think the fact watching Sherlock have a panic attack was very anxiety driven as well, because he did it perfectly. That's exactly what it is like to have an anxiety attack. In many cases, it's just sit there and you're trying to deal with it and repress it while in public, and people are trying to talk to you and you're just trying to sort through your thoughts. So I think they did that really well as well, but it was very different from the book. And Sherlock had an outburst, and so you got lots of nice John and Sherlock relationship moments, like friendship moments. Nothing slashy unless you want to read it that way, but good friendship dynamic built up again, and throwing Lestrade in there was a bit of a laugh as well. Russell Tovey did a fantastic job. I thought it quite humorous to see him standing in a forest after his role on Being Human. I kept expecting him to almost transform into a werewolf, so I think he might have found that a bit tongue-in-cheek, that fact that he's frightened of a giant hound, when in Being Human he is, in many respects, a giant hound. I liked the fact that they threw the improbable line in there from the Arthur Conan Doyle work. It's always good when they have a direct quote, so hats off to them for that. Does anyone else notice, random little fact, that Sherlock seems to only have 2 shirts? Tight white shirt, tight purple shirt. It just seems to be on rotation. Either that or he has like multiple versions of the same shirt. It's just a funny little thing. I like that Lestrade is being called his handler. Lestrade is his handler. He gets so much more credit in this than he does in the Arthur Conan Doyle work, and I really do like that adaptation change, that Detective Lestrade gets the appreciation he deserves, because Sherlock does say that he is the best that Scotland Yard has to offer. Whereas in the movies he tends to be counted as a bumbling fool, which I think he deserves a lot more recognition for what he does having to deal with Sherlock and dealing with all these crazy crimes that goes on. It's sort of like the Detective Japp from Poirot, except Poirot is a bit more condescending to Japp than Sherlock is to Lestrade. Then again, Sherlock didn't even learn Lestrade's first name, so who knows. John in the Cage was a very clever idea of him locking himself in there. Bit of a bastard move from Sherlock for pulling that on John when the poor man has been to war and has plenty of post-traumatic stress, which we've seen in fleeting moments of like cringing at gunshots, and the first scene in A Study in Pink when he's like, what would you say if you had to beg for your life, and stuff like that. So it just shows that Sherlock even treats his only friend with as almost like a lab rat, if need be, for the purposes of his own gains. So he's still definitely the same man that he was in season 1, despite being somewhat more cordial towards Mrs. Hudson and Molly after he apologised. So that's interesting to see that it's sort of going full circle. In Sherlock is this pie chart where more of it is filling up with human traits, but there's still definitely this overpowering aspects of being analytical. and he's just learning to read humans better, and seeing when he should show some signs of empathy. And he even freely admitted in this episode that he didn't understand the reasons for why the owners didn't put their dog down. So I thought that that was good, that they highlighted the fact that he's still missing these fundamental social cues, because it is an important part of who Sherlock is, and it's an important part of how the dynamic works, having John there to give him those cues, because he needs to learn them, to know when to smile and laugh and say something funny. He did try to make him coffee though, and stuff like that, but he was definitely more manic in this. So I think it was good that they eventually did visit the home of Henry. It was very different from in short, it was very different from the ACD version. I liked the adaptation. It is not my favourite episode so far, I have to say. I think I did prefer Scandal in Belgravia, which is a bit of a shame because I actually preferred the Hounds of the Baskervilles story to the Scandal in Bohemia. But these things happen. We're all set up for Reckenbeck Falls with that last little bit of Moriarty sitting in a cell writing Sherlock everywhere. Not sure what that's about, but I'm sure we'll find out in just a few days, and we'll have closure and sadness. Lots and lots of post-Sherlock depression, I suppose. But yes, if anyone wishes to discuss, please feel free to do so in the comments or on my Tumblr. I'm happy to go over details, particularly if anyone's read the ACD book and wants to compare and contrast or highlight things I've missed or go into further detail about any of the things I've discussed. Please go for it. And I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week. Toodles!